My girlfriend humiliated me during a photo shoot by making fun of my appearance and chasing after a male model right in front of me. I walked away without saying a word. What happened after that shattered the flawless image she'd built for herself. I'm a 30-year-old guy who grew up in a typical middle-class suburb. My dad taught high school math, and my mom spent her days in the school library, surrounded by books and students. They were both big believers in the power of education, especially my dad. Anytime I brought home a grade that wasn't an A, he'd sit me down at the kitchen table and we'd go over the material until I fully understood it. He wasn't harsh, just firm, and those late-night study marathons likely set the foundation for my career in tech. My older sister Jess was the social butterfly of the family. While I was piecing together broken electronics in the basement, she was planning spirit weeks and charity dances. Jess was 2 years ahead of me in school and seemed to know everyone and everything going on. She had this sixth sense about people, something I clearly didn't inherit. These days she works in marketing in Seattle, juggling campaigns and networking events like a pro, but we still talk nearly every day. Her gut instincts have always been eerily accurate, especially when it comes to the people I date. I made it through state college, on a series of scholarships majoring in computer engineering. I kept my expenses low, subsisting on instant noodles, bargain bin energy drinks, and pulling all-nighters staring at lines of code. Despite the grind, I graduated with a 3.9 GPA and very little debt. After that, I spent the next 5 years in a mind-numbing corporate tech job. The money was fine, but the work was uninspiring. I was just another cog in the machine, cranking out code for someone else's vision. My cubicle was dreary. 3 half-dead plants and a framed photo of my parents were the only signs of life. I lived frugally, saving almost every cent. The one big purchase I allowed myself was a used 2014 Subaru WRX in Rally Blue with about 40,000 miles on it. It had a small dent in the rear quarter panel that I never bothered to fix, but I didn't care. That car symbolized freedom to me. It was the first thing I ever bought that wasn't purely utilitarian. I'd spend weekends tuning it, adding a cold air intake here or a short throw shifter there. Nothing too wild, just enough to make it feel like mine. When I was 27, Jason, my old college roommate, got back in touch. We'd kept a casual friendship going, meeting up now and then for drinks and to vent about work. He pitched me an idea involving artificial intelligence and detecting deep fakes and other altered media. This was in early 2020, just as deep fakes were starting to creep into the mainstream consciousness. We were both feeling trapped in our jobs, so we made a pact and quit on the same day to build something of our own. We launched our startup from the cramped garage apartment Jason rented. He brought the machine learning chops, and I built the back-end systems. For the first half year, we lived like hermits, surviving on our dwindling savings and working 18-hour days. My beloved WRX gathered dust in the parking lot, and I rotated between the same 3 hoodies and worn-out cargo shorts. The hustle was real. By the end of our second year, we had a working prototype that caught the attention of a major player in digital security. Let's call them TechGuard. They provide advanced protective software to social media giants and online platforms. One Tuesday morning, an email from one of their executives landed in our inbox. Jason and I stared at it, frozen in disbelief, worried that even opening it might make the opportunity vanish. Around the same time, I met Leah at a networking event. She was 29 and looked like she'd just stepped off a fashion shoot. She was flawless, the kind of woman who needs hours to get ready and somehow always looks like a lifestyle influencer. Leah worked as the lead event planner for Apex Hotels, coordinating high-profile executive retreats and luxury business conferences. It was the kind of job where connections were everything, and she seemed to have them all. She'd casually mention semi-famous names in conversation like it was nothing. Oh, when I did the tech conference last month, Elon's team was so picky about the lighting setup. That kind of thing. When she first walked up to me at the bar, I actually turned to see who she was really talking to. She opened with a comment about the appetizers, and before I knew it, we were deep in conversation. She laughed at my awkward jokes, asked insightful questions about my work, and left with my number saved in her phone. Our first date was at a fancy downtown restaurant where the menus had no prices. Within a few weeks, we were officially a couple. Part of me kept waiting for her to wake up and realize she'd made a mistake. Jess came to visit from Seattle not long after we'd started dating. We all went out to a nice dinner, and Leah turned on the charm full blast, complimenting Jess's hair, asking about her career, and seeming genuinely interested. But later that night, while Leah was in the bathroom, Jess pulled me aside and dropped the bomb. "That girl's as fake as her eyelashes," she said, her voice low and sharp. "Finn, I'm telling you, watch how she talks about you when you're not around." I shrugged it off as classic, sisterly overprotectiveness. "You've spent like 3 hours with her," I argued. "She's just polished, that's all. Not everyone's as laid back as you." Jess just gave me a look. The same one she'd given me when I tried sneaking out to a party in high school that ended in a police bust. Her instincts were rarely wrong. I should have listened. 2 years into the relationship, Leah's red flags weren't just waving, they were practically blinding. She'd introduce me to her friends with subtle disclaimers. "This is Finn. He's super smart with computers," like she had to validate why she was with someone who didn't fit her usual mold. When we were out with her inner circle, other immaculately groomed women and their equally curated partners, she'd steer every conversation away from my job. "Let's not bore everyone with tech talk," she'd say with a smile that never reached her eyes. Her suggestions were constant. "You'd look so sharp in this blazer," she'd say, while holding up something that cost more than my rent. When I hesitated, she'd sigh and say, "Some guys actually want to look good for their girlfriends." The jabs she threw at me were always perfectly calculated, just subtle enough that calling them out made me look like I was overreacting. "That shirt looks better on you than most of your wardrobe," she'd say with a half smile. Or, "Your friend Ryan really knows how to dress. Maybe you could take a page from his book." These weren't compliments. They were cleverly disguised digs meant to chip away at my self-worth without ever sounding outright cruel. Each one lodged under my skin like a splinter, but I told myself to let it go. I was tired, stretched thin, focused on what mattered. Meanwhile, our startup was teetering at a tipping point. Jason and I were in overdrive, throwing ourselves into 16-hour workdays, chasing the final benchmark that would unlock the last installment of our acquisition deal. Our algorithm had to detect manipulated media with at least 92% accuracy to meet TechGuard's contractual threshold. As of that week, we were stuck at 79%, and I was sleeping in the office more nights than not, consumed with debugging and fine-tuning every possible parameter. The office fridge had become a shrine to caffeine and desperation. Rows of energy drinks lined up like soldiers, stacked beside cartons of leftover takeout that we no longer even bothered labeling. My desk was a mess of scrawled notes, crumpled napkins with pseudocode, and a graveyard of protein bar wrappers. I had a hoodie permanently draped over my chair and a backup change of clothes stuffed into a drawer. Ready for the nights I didn't bother going home. My beloved WRX, the car I used to wash and wax every weekend like a ritual, was gathering dust in the underground garage. I hadn't driven it in weeks. When I finally did, it was so covered in grime that I could scrawl my name across the hood with a finger. Leah's tolerance for my schedule was wearing thinner by the day. "I didn't sign up to date a ghost," she snapped after I canceled dinner plans for the third time in a month. My ex never put work ahead of me. That comment burned deeper than I expected. I hated that she made me feel like a failure for pursuing a dream she claimed to support. I kept telling myself it would improve. Just hold on until the deal closes, until the product is finalized. My parents noticed the toll it was taking. On our weekly video calls, my mom would squint into the screen, concern etched between her brows. "You look exhausted, sweetheart. Are you taking care of yourself?" My dad, ever the straight shooter, didn't mince words. "Is this woman really worth everything she's putting you through?" he asked one night, arms folded. "You're disappearing into yourself." I always defended Leah. "She's just driven like me. She understands the hustle," I'd insist, trying to convince both of us. But the truth kept gnawing at the edges of my resolve. She understood her own grind just fine. Mine was merely inconvenient. That Friday evening, she brought up her friend Amber while we sat in her living room. I was half listening, reviewing data logs on my laptop, eyes darting between windows of code. "Amber needs help with her photography portfolio," Leah said casually. "She's building her wedding photography brand and needs some couples to pose for staged shots for her website." "Sounds cool," I mumbled, still absorbed in a particularly tricky memory leak. "She's planning a shoot this Saturday. 2:00, Riverside Park," Leah continued, glancing at me to see if I was actually paying attention. I paused, processing her words. This Saturday? Jason and I had already scheduled a full-day session to work through the reference data issues. We were finally close to a real breakthrough. Leah's expression shifted instantly, that icy look I'd come to dread. "We haven't done anything together in weeks, Finn," she snapped. "It's just a couple of hours. You can spare that, can't you?" The irony wasn't lost on me, this from someone who routinely worked 60-hour weeks herself. But I was so emotionally depleted, I didn't have the energy to argue. I knew what would follow if I declined. Cold silences, snide comments, and that constant quiet withdrawal of affection. "Fine," I said, shutting my laptop. "I'll meet you there." Her mood flipped. She smiled and leaned in to kiss my cheek. "Perfect. Wear that blue button-down I got you for your birthday. It's the only thing in your closet that actually fits you right." That remark stung more than it should have. Saturday arrived, and I did my best to play the part. I showered, shaved, and wore the exact shirt she requested. I even spritzed on the cologne she'd given me, the one she said made me smell less like a basement. On the way to the park, I picked up her usual coffee order, extra complicated, 5 modifications, and waited while the barista made it twice after getting it wrong the first time. When I reached the stone bridge where we were supposed to meet, I immediately saw Amber arranging her camera gear. And then I saw Leah. But she wasn't alone. She was wrapped around another man, a guy I'd never seen before, her arms draped over his shoulders. His hands rested confidently on her hips. Their faces were inches apart as Amber directed the pose. The man looked like he'd just walked off a fashion magazine cover. Designer stubble, artfully tousled hair, and a body that screamed personal trainer. He wore an expensive jacket I recognized. Leah had shown it to me weeks ago online, suggesting I should consider investing in better wardrobe pieces. I stood frozen, coffee in hand, watching what felt like a scene from someone else's life. My pulse roared in my ears. Leah spotted me and leaned in to whisper something to the model. He nodded, then stepped aside with performative disinterest, checking his watch as if eager to escape. Leah approached me, smiling like nothing was out of place. "Hey, you made it?" she said breezily, plucking the coffee from my hand without a word of thanks. I noticed she was wearing the pearl earrings I'd given her for our anniversary. My stomach twisted. "Who's that?" I asked, gesturing toward the male model now scrolling on his phone. "Oh, that's Eric," she replied like it was no big deal. "He's helping with the shoot. And you didn't think to mention him? She rolled her eyes and took a long sip of coffee. Come on, Finn. These photos need to look premium. Amber's trying to attract high-end clients. Look at you, and then look at Eric. Be honest. Who do you think photographs better? I stared at her, unsure if I'd heard correctly. What? It's not personal, she said with mock empathy. It's just business. Amber needs these to look aspirational. And let's face it, those startup hoodies and cargo shorts of yours don't exactly scream dream wedding. I'm not even wearing a hoodie, I said quietly. I'm wearing the shirt you picked out. She gave me a small, pitying smile and patted my arm like I was a lost child. Why don't you wait at the coffee shop across the street? We'll be done in an hour. Or just go back to your code stuff with Jason. I know that's where your mind is anyway. Her tone, so casual, so dismissively cruel, was the final straw. Something inside me fractured, and I felt myself quietly slipping away. I stood there for a heartbeat, staring at her. In that moment, something shifted. It was like one of those optical illusions, those magic eye puzzles from the 90s, where you suddenly see the image hidden in the chaos. Everything came into perfect focus. I saw her for exactly who she was. No, I said, my voice steady and quiet. She barely turned her head, already half rotated back toward Eric and Amber. No, what? She asked, disinterested. No, I won't be waiting at the coffee shop, I replied. Then I simply walked away. No shouting match, no dramatic pause, just quiet resolve. I didn't even glance back. Whatever she called after me, because I'm sure she did, didn't register. Her voice was just background noise now, no different than the passing cars, or the children laughing nearby on the playground. Static. I reached my WRX, slid into the driver's seat, and turned the key. The familiar growl of the Boxer engine filled the parking lot, the same sound she always complained was too loud, too aggressive. For the first time, I found it soothing. I didn't peel out or slam the door. There was no need. Just a calm, controlled departure. I drove off, the tension in my shoulders slowly unwinding with every block I passed. As I drove home, I felt oddly weightless, numb almost, like I'd been injected with some emotional anesthetic. The fog of self-doubt and overthinking that had hung over me for months suddenly cleared. And in that mental clarity, my mind began unraveling memories, like replaying old tapes. But this time, I saw them differently. Every comment she'd ever made, comparing me to other men, every unsolicited suggestion for how to improve myself, every moment she seemed slightly ashamed to be seen with me, came back like a film reel. One memory in particular surfaced, clearer than the rest. It was about 3 months into our relationship. We'd gone out to eat, and at the restaurant, I'd randomly run into Dave, a college buddy of mine. Dave and I had been close during our undergrad days and quickly fell into a spirited conversation about a passion project he was working on, some open-source optimization tool. Leah had smiled politely for the first few minutes, then excused herself to make a quick phone call. When she came back, she immediately changed the subject to travel plans and upcoming events. Later that night, she casually said, "Your friend Dave is nice, but maybe keep the computer talk between you guys." It's not exactly dinner conversation. At the time, I'd felt a twinge of embarrassment, like I'd accidentally violated some unspoken social etiquette. Now I saw it clearly. She wasn't embarrassed for me. She was embarrassed by me. When I got back to my apartment, I was still in that rare, focused state, the same kind of mental zone I usually reserved for troubleshooting the most complex back-end problems. I moved through my home like a man on a mission. First, I blocked Leah's number. Then, I scrubbed every trace of her from my social media. Her contact info, photos, shared posts, gone. I changed the security code to the building's entry panel, just in case. Then I made a note to call the locksmith first thing Monday to change my actual door locks. I grabbed the framed photo of us from my nightstand, the one we took on our trip to Aspen, and dropped it unceremoniously in the kitchen trash can. 2 years together, dismantled in 20 minutes with surgical precision. Then I paused and really looked around my apartment. Really looked. The place had slowly been colonized by her influence. Throw pillows in pastel colors that I hated, but kept because she insisted they tied the room together. A massive abstract art print on the wall that I never liked. I left it all where it was. The objects didn't matter. What mattered was reclaiming my time, my mental space, my peace. I turned on my laptop, not out of avoidance, but out of purpose. For the first time in months, I was working without the persistent buzz of guilt and anxiety in the background. No more checking my phone every 20 minutes. No more planning my evening around her passive-aggressive moods. No more crafting justifications for why I needed one more night, one more hour, one more revision. Around 2 in the morning, eyes dry and burning, I found it. The breakthrough. The problem wasn't the algorithm. It never had been. It was the data we were feeding it. We'd been refining the detection process obsessively, but we hadn't questioned whether the test images were accurately labeled. Turns out, a bunch of the authentic images we'd been training against had subtle lighting artifacts, errors so nuanced only a precise algorithm would catch them. I rewrote the testing protocol, reclassified the images using proper metadata, especially for lighting discrepancies, and initiated a fresh round of tests. When the results came in, the accuracy rate had skyrocketed, from a stagnant 79% to a stunning 94.8%. I immediately texted Jason, found it. The validation dataset was misclassified, fixed, accuracy at 94.8%. He replied in less than 10 seconds, "Holy crap, are you serious?" I didn't even stop. I documented every change, prepped the updated model, and drafted a full demo packet for TechGuard. Around 5 a.m., I passed out on the couch, too tired to drag myself to bed, and for the first time in over a year, I slept deeply. Uninterrupted. Undisturbed. By the time I woke up later that morning, it had begun. Leah realized I was serious. First came the text messages, all of which bounced. Then came the emails. One after the other, each more frantic than the last. "Are you really ghosting me? This is ridiculous, Finn. We need to talk ASAP." "So your fragile male ego can't handle a photo shoot?" I didn't respond. Not once. I poured myself into finalizing the acquisition with Jason. We sent the updated system to TechGuard's tech team. Their reply came just a few hours later, directly from the CTO. "This exceeds all outlined benchmarks. We're moving forward immediately. Legal will expedite the final transfer." Days later, we each received a wire transfer of $1.6 million. Just like that, the startup we'd built from nothing became a success story. The press release dropped the next day. My phone exploded with messages from friends, former colleagues, and random acquaintances, but none of them mentioned Leah. No one even asked. It was like she had never been part of the story at all. I called my parents to tell them. My dad's voice cracked. "I always knew you were brilliant, son. Your mom and I are so proud of you." When Mom got on the line, she immediately launched into practical mode. "Make sure you diversify, and don't forget about taxes. Capital gains are a killer." Jess called about an hour later, screaming into the phone, "Holy crap, you're a millionaire. I want a Tesla for Christmas." I laughed, a real chest-deep laugh that felt alien but welcome. "How about a Subaru?" "They're dependable." "Seriously, though," she said, softening, "I'm so proud of you, Finn. You and Jason worked your butts off. You earned every bit of this. I almost told her about Leah right then. Almost. But I stopped myself. That conversation could wait. 3 days later, she came to my building. Marcus, the security guard I'd built a quiet friendship with, weekly coffee runs and polite chats, called me from the front desk. There's a woman down here who says she knows you, says it's urgent. Her name is Leah. She's saying it's an emergency, Marcus informed me over the intercom. Wants to come up. Don't let her up, I replied firmly. She's not welcome. You got it, he said, before hesitating. She's making quite a scene. Want me to call the cops? Give her one warning, I said. If she doesn't leave, go ahead. From my window, I could see her white Audi idling in the visitors' parking lot, glinting in the afternoon sun. She sat there for nearly an hour, no doubt hoping I'd cave and let her in. I didn't. Eventually, she pulled away, tires crunching slowly over the asphalt. Later, Marcus called back to fill me in. She tried telling me she left some critical medication in your apartment, he said with a dry chuckle. I've seen that woman come and go for 2 years, and not once did she mention a medical condition. The building manager corroborated it. Apparently, when the sob story didn't work, Leah switched tactics, claimed she had a cousin who was a lawyer, threatened lawsuits, and even attempted to cry her way past security. In the end, they had to issue a formal warning about involving law enforcement. Only then did she finally retreat. On day 4, I walked into my usual coffee shop, craving caffeine and a few moments of normalcy. That's when I saw Megan, Leah's best friend. She scanned the room like she was on a mission and lit up with exaggerated surprise when our eyes met. Finn! What a coincidence! She exclaimed, sliding into the chair across from me uninvited. We'd always had a polite rapport, but I knew where her loyalties lay. We've all been so worried, she began, her tone coated in concern. Leah's been beside herself. There must have been some huge misunderstanding. I closed my laptop slowly, locking eyes with her. There was no misunderstanding, I said. She made herself perfectly clear. Megan opened her mouth, but I was already packing my things. Have a good day, Megan. I walked away without waiting for a response, her voice calling after me, growing smaller with every step. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Jason. Tech Guard wants to meet tomorrow to discuss next steps. You in? I smiled. Absolutely, I replied. By the way, I broke up with Leah. 3 dots popped up instantly. Finally, she was awful. Call me later. That short message from my best friend meant more than he probably knew. It was the simplest, most honest validation I'd gotten in weeks. On day 5, an unfamiliar number lit up my screen. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the decline button, but curiosity won. Hello? Is this Finn Patterson? A male voice asked, clipped and formal. This is Richard Taylor. I believe you know my daughter Leah. I tensed. I do, I said cautiously. I understand there's been some situation between the two of you. That's correct, I replied, mirroring his businesslike tone. She's quite upset, he continued. She tells us you completely cut off contact after a misunderstanding at some photography session. I couldn't help it. I let out a short laugh. Is that what she told you? I asked. Did she mention she replaced me with a male model for a couple's shoot because I wasn't attractive enough? That she told me I wasn't what brides wanted to see and suggested I wait at a coffee shop while she posed with another man? There was a pause. That's not the version I heard. I'm not surprised, I said calmly. She said I overreacted? Richard, I just finalized a multi-million-dollar acquisition deal. Do you think I'd walk away from a relationship over something trivial? There was silence on the line, then a note of surprise in his voice. Multi-million? She said our startup was doing okay, didn't she? Well, TechGuard acquired our technology for $3.2 million. The deal closed this week. Another pause. Then, I see. Your daughter made her opinion of me very clear, I said, my voice even. I've simply chosen to believe her and move on. I understand, he said finally, voice subdued. For what it's worth, she's always had her mother's superficial tendencies. I'd hoped she would grow out of them. There was nothing else to add. We exchanged curt goodbyes and hung up. 20 minutes later, I received an unexpected email. It was from Amber. Leah doesn't know I'm sending these, she wrote. I'm horrified by what happened. I never would have gone along with it if I'd known the full situation. I'm so sorry. Attached were dozens of images from the photo shoot. Most were generic poses of Leah and Eric, the kind you'd expect in a wedding photographer's portfolio. But the last series took my breath away. Amber had unknowingly captured the entire moment. The shot where Leah noticed me walking up. Another where she pulled me aside. A third mid-speech, with her mouth caught in the act of saying, "Not camera material." And the final photos, me turning away, face blank with disbelief, and Leah behind me, rolling her eyes. Proof. Cold, irrefutable, visual proof. I downloaded them and responded simply, "Thank you for your honesty." Later that afternoon, my phone rang again. This time, it was Diana Reed from TechGuard. "Mr. Patterson, I'm the events director handling the upcoming acquisition announcement. We're organizing the formal press release and coordinating with Apex Hotels for the corporate event. Leah Taylor mentioned she knows you personally. Should we loop her into planning communication?" My heart dropped into my stomach. I hadn't known Apex worked with TechGuard. She had never said a word. "Actually, Miss Reed, that won't be necessary," I said. "Miss Taylor and I are no longer affiliated. It would be best if all communication went directly through our internal teams." There was a pause. "I see," she said slowly. "That's actually helpful. We've had a few complications with Miss Taylor lately. She's been unusually assertive about managing this event herself." Everything clicked into place. Of course. Leah had seen the announcement event as her moment, the chance to manage a high-profile, high-stakes function tied to a multi-million-dollar acquisition, with her boyfriend as one of the stars of the story. Perfect optics, a professional coup. And now the entire narrative was crumbling in her hands. "Miss Reed, may I ask, off the record, are you satisfied with Apex Hotels as your event partner?" I asked, careful to keep my tone professional. There was a brief pause on the line before her voice dropped slightly. "Between us," she said, "we're exploring other options. Some professionalism concerns have been raised, though nothing has been finalized yet." After the call ended, I sat back in my chair, Amber's photos still open on my screen. Leah's expression, mid-sentence, frozen in the act of diminishing me in front of a stranger. I hadn't planned to use the images for anything more than a demonstration, but now, a different kind of clarity settled over me. I didn't need revenge. I needed the truth to speak for itself. The next morning, Jason and I met to finalize our technical presentation for TechGuard's executive team. It was a high-stakes meeting, not just a milestone, but a defining moment for our startup. We needed to prove our technology in real-world conditions, showing how the algorithm identified authentic and altered images with pinpoint accuracy. "I have some real-world examples we can use," I said, sending him Amber's files. Leah's face was clearly visible in several. Jason's eyes widened as he scrolled through. "Dude, is this Leah?" I nodded, then briefly explained what had happened at the park. Jason, never Leah's biggest fan, looked stunned. "That's ice cold, man. I knew she was controlling, but this? Are you sure you want to use these?" "They're ideal," I said. "High resolution, natural light, multiple subjects, zero manipulation. The algorithm flags them as 100% authentic. No names, just subject F and subject M. We embedded the images alongside other verified test cases. To any outsider, they were just part of a data set, clean, effective, emotionless. But to me, they symbolized more. A line in the sand. A final severance from everything Leah had tried to reshape in me. What Jason didn't know was that I'd done some digging the night before. TechGuard spent roughly $3 million a year on executive events, most of which were handled by Apex Hotels. Leah had been promoted recently to senior corporate event manager, her biggest step up yet. She'd boasted about managing top-tier clients, but never named them outright. I was now almost certain that TechGuard was her crown jewel, the pinnacle of her career so far. The day of the presentation arrived. Jason and I entered the conference room where 10 members of TechGuard's executive leadership team were already seated, including their CEO, CFO, and our main contact, Dr. Adam Langston, the CTO. I recognized Diana Reed right away, poised, sharp-featured, her silver gray hair cut in a neat bob, red glasses perched perfectly on her nose. She gave me a polite nod as we connected our laptops. The presentation was smooth, precise. We walked them through our architecture, performance metrics, and real-time detection processes. When we reached the portion on authentic image verification, the screen shifted. The park photos loaded one by one. Leah's image filled the screen. She was mid-gesture, leaning slightly, her face sharp with the condescension I remembered all too well. There were shots of her gesturing toward Eric, of her delivering the line that had gutted me. I faced slack and stunned. But in the room, no one reacted. Why would they? To them, she was just part of the data. After the meeting ended, the executives mingled briefly. Dr. Langston approached me. "Those park photos in the authenticity section," he said casually. "The woman in them looks familiar." My pulse ticked up. "Oh, she's an event coordinator from Apex. Leah something." "Taylor?" he asked, eyes narrowing slightly. "Yes," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Langston glanced back at the screen, then looked at me. "Interesting," he said. "Well, Mr. Patterson, your algorithm is impressive. Very illuminating." He said nothing more, but I caught him in QA quiet conversation with Diana Reed before they left. I had no idea what, if anything, would come of it. But I'd shown the truth. No commentary, no vendetta, just facts, just data. The kind our system was built to preserve. 3 days later, Diana called again. "Finn just wanted to let you know we've decided to move our event services to Summit Hospitality Group. Would you and Jason be available to meet with them next week to coordinate the press launch?" "Of course," I replied. "May I ask what prompted the change?" "We had some ongoing concerns about transparency and professionalism," she said carefully. "We prefer to work with partners who demonstrate integrity." After we hung up, I sat in silence. I hadn't actively tried to destroy Leah's career. I hadn't even told anyone at TechGuard the full story. I'd simply allowed them to see who she really was. Unfiltered, unedited. Just like the images in our presentation. That evening, I took the WRX out for a long overdue drive. The air was cool. The windows were down. I took the winding rural roads that curved through the hills outside the city. The kind I used to escape to before life got heavy. With the engine's low rumble in my ears and the wind tugging at my sleeves, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Freedom. A week passed, then the fallout began in earnest. It was nearly midnight when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. "You calculated, vindictive jerk." Leah's voice shook with fury. "You destroyed everything." I didn't say a word. I just listened. TechGuard canceled their entire contract with Apex. Do you even understand what you've done? That account was worth millions. My commission alone was over $120,000. She was unraveling in real time. Each accusation revealed more than she probably intended. "They showed me the photos from your presentation," she hissed. "You planned this, didn't you? Used me as part of some pathetic revenge fantasy. What kind of man does that? I showed them what actually happened, I said calmly. Nothing more. They fired me, Finn. 4 years gone. My reputation in this industry is shredded because of you. That sounds like a consequence of your own choices. Her tone shifted from rage to desperation. Please, you have to fix this. Call TechGuard. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Goodbye, Leah. I ended the call and blocked the number. 2 days later, Leah's mother, Elaine, showed up at my office unannounced. Karen, my assistant, looked uncomfortable, but let her in. Finn, Elaine said, refusing my offer of water. I know my daughter hurt you. I'm not here to excuse her. Leah told us what really happened at the park, and I just want to say, I'm sorry. I'm ashamed of how she treated you. That's not how we raised her, Elaine murmured, her fingers nervously twisting the gold band on her left hand. But she's desperate, Finn. She can't find work anywhere in event planning. No one's willing to even give her an interview after the TechGuard fallout. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. She's been having panic attacks, talks about moving back home. It's been hard. I folded my hands on the desk, letting her speak. Mrs. Taylor? Please, she interrupted. Call me Elaine. I'm not here to ask you to reconcile with her. I'm not naive. I know how badly she treated you. But I am asking you if there's any part of you that could, maybe, just speak to someone at TechGuard. Give her a reference, something to help her start over, anything. I looked at this woman, so different from her daughter. Elaine had always treated me with nothing but kindness, even when Leah hadn't. She'd welcomed me into their home like family, remembered details about my parents, and always asked about my work like she actually cared. She hadn't deserved any of this. I'll think about it, I said quietly. That's all I can promise. Thank you, she whispered. Later that afternoon, I opened an email from Amber. The subject line was simple. Thought you should know. Leah's been spinning her own version of events, telling anyone who'll listen that you destroyed her career just because she suggested you weren't right for my photography portfolio. Playing the victim. But I've been showing people the actual photos. Most of our mutual friends have seen through it, but she's getting desperate. I forwarded the message to Elaine with a short note. Before I consider helping, I need to know she's being honest, at least now. Elaine responded within an hour. I understand, I'll talk to her. A week later, Jason and I were packing up our office for the move to TechGuard's headquarters. Karen poked her head in. There's someone here to see you, she said cautiously. It's Leah. My body tensed. Should I call security? I shook my head. Number, it's fine. Send her in. Leah looked nothing like the poised woman I remembered. Her hair was unstyled, her eyes swollen from crying, and her clothes were wrinkled. She sat down slowly, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap, I thought her knuckles might pop. 2 minutes, I said flatly. That's all you get. She nodded. I deserve everything that's happened. I blinked, surprised. Mom showed me Amber's email. She's right. I've been lying, trying to save face. What I did to you was cruel. I was shallow, obsessed with appearances, and I treated you like you weren't good enough when you were always too good for me. Her voice cracked. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness or favors. I just wanted to tell you the truth finally. I'm sorry, Finn. I really am. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the desk. Diana Reed at TechGuard. Call her tomorrow. Tell her I suggested you reach out regarding the junior coordinator position in their Austin office. It's a demotion from what you had, but it's a start. She stared at the card like it was made of glass. Why would you help me after everything? I looked her straight in the eye, because carrying resentment is exhausting, and I have better things to do, but listen carefully. This is your only chance. If I hear you used my name for anything more than that one introduction, it's over. Understood?" She nodded, clutching the card. "Understood. And thank you." After she left, Jason leaned against my doorframe. "You all right?" "Yeah," I said, turning back to my laptop, "just tying off some loose ends." "You're a better man than me," he muttered. "I would have let her burn." I shrugged. Sometimes the best revenge is simply moving forward while they're stuck looking backward. That night, I called Diana. I kept it professional. "I'm not vouching for Leah's work," I explained, "but she's applying for the junior coordinator position, and I suggested she reach out. She's admitted fault. I believe people deserve second chances if they own their mistakes." There was a brief silence. Then Diana said, "I appreciate your candor, Finn, and your compassion. That says a lot about your character." That weekend, my dad called. Ostensibly, he wanted to talk about index funds, but I knew better. "I told your mom you're fine, but you know how she worries. That's dad code for you're worried too, right?" He chuckled. "Maybe. You okay?" "I am. Really." He cleared his throat. "When I was teaching, I had this one kid, smart as hell, but his parents always dragged him down. Every time he'd get ahead, they'd tear him apart. Tell him he was arrogant, getting too big for his britches." There was a pause. "Some people can't stand to see others succeed. Says more about them than it does about you." "Thanks, Dad," I said, genuinely moved. He cleared his throat again. "So, about those index funds." And just like that, we shifted to safer ground. 3 months later, I was in San Francisco, standing outside the convention center as a featured speaker at one of the biggest tech conferences in the country. I'd driven my WRX, even though I could now afford any car I wanted. I'd finally had the bodywork done, and the rally blue paint gleamed in the sun. As I pulled up to the valet, the attendant whistled. "Sweet ride, man." "STIWRX," I replied. 2014 EJ engine, bulletproof." "My brother has one," he said. "Over 200,000 miles and still running like a dream." Inside, the conference buzzed with energy. Booths and banners from global companies. People are scanning QR codes and swapping business cards like candy. Our algorithm, now fully integrated into multiple platforms, was one of the highlights of the year. 2 years ago, I wouldn't have dared walk through those doors. I'd have felt like an imposter. Now I was headlining a panel on the ethical implications of deepfake detection technology. The room was packed, nearly 300 people. Jason sat in the front row, grinning like a proud sibling. The presentation went perfectly. The live demo earned gasps. The Q&A was sharp. And the applause afterward? It wasn't just loud. It was real. As I walked off stage, I felt it. That quiet confidence that comes not from proving others wrong, but from proving yourself right. During the Q&A session, a young engineer with a lanyard full of credentials raised his hand. His question was sharp, technically intricate, and clearly well thought out, about how our algorithm handled subtle contextual inconsistencies, especially those involving manipulated shadows and reflections. I leaned forward, energized by the challenge, and began breaking down the neural filtering process we'd refined over the last year. As I spoke, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I checked it discreetly. A text from Karen. "Summit Hospitality called. They're hosting the Innovation Awards next month. Wanted to confirm if you're attending." I smiled at the message, recalling the quiet shift in events months earlier when Summit had taken over TechGuard's corporate contracts from Apex Hotels. Diana had told me offhandedly that Leah had taken the junior coordinator position at their Austin office. She'd added, with a tone of cautious optimism, that Leah was working hard and showing signs of growth. 6 months after the acquisition, I moved into a modest but welcoming home in a peaceful neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, a sun-drenched kitchen, a tidy little backyard with a creaky swing that came with the place, and most importantly, a garage to finally house my WRX. No more street parking, no more layers of dust. Jason dropped by one weekend, bringing along his new girlfriend, a bookish woman with a sly sense of humor. He raised a glass at dinner. From surviving on 3 packets of ramen a day just to pay rent to still eating ramen by choice, even as millionaires, he said with a grin, here's to knowing what actually matters. I laughed and toasted with him. 3 weeks later, I got a short email from Leah. I'm working hard at the Austin office. Thank you for the second chance? I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because some stories don't need grand finales or poetic justice. Sometimes it's enough for people to stumble, learn something real, and quietly move forward. That night, I pulled into my garage, the WRX's freshly painted quarter panel gleaming under the lights. I stepped into my quiet home, alone and content. No spotlight, no applause, just peace. And for the first time, being not camera material felt like the highest compliment I could have ever received.